That is right. Today we're doing a deep dive on timing your Pokemon investments, both buying and selling. But to do an adequate video on this, we're going to need a location change. Location swap successful. So, firstly, I want to talk about timing investments and its two components, buying and selling. Now, before we actually get into anything, I have to give you this disclaimer. I am not a financial expert. This is just my opinion on what I would do in these different situations, and it's based off of some research I've done and things like that, but I have no authority as a financial advisor to tell you what to do with your money. So take all of this with a grain of salt. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Apologies for my horrendous handwriting, but the components of the buy that we're going to look at are how much risk you're willing to take on, how active you want to be in these investments, your physical location, country, or where you are within a country, how much money you have currently to invest, and your current situation. A combination of all of these things goes into timing your buy. So we'll take a look at each one of these individually in depth, that way we can get a better idea of what I'm saying. So we'll start with number one. How much risk are you willing to take on? So when I'm discussing this, I'm kind of talking about two different timelines. So the first one would be about a year after release, or when the price bottoms out, anywhere from $80 to $100 generally. Obviously, there's exceptions. Evolving Skies, 151. They're not going to bottom out quite that low. But that is a general timeline, 1 year in, when it's bottomed out. The second one I see is when a product is about to leave the Pokemon Center. So this can vary in time because different sets have different popularities, and this leads to them being bought out quicker or slower. But that's the general timeline we're going to look at. All right, I've illustrated a graph of what the general booster box kind of looks like. If you take a look at most of the Sun and Moon, Sword and Shield sets, they all kind of have this trend where it starts off high, obviously the hype, new set coming out, people want to rip it, people want to get it right on release. So there's high demand, and the supply is still high, but the demand is even higher. So the prices are generally high, not quite MSRP, but they're decently high. So then in the following year after its release, the price kind of ticks down. So new sets get released, hype leaves the set and transfers into the new ones, but supply is still pretty abundant because it's within a year after release, it's still in print. So that's where we get that kind of drop off over the first year. And the low point is generally, this can vary obviously, but 8 months to like 16 months is when the box is usually at its lowest price. And then after this point, it starts going out of print, and people remember this set and they're like, oh, that was so fun to open. And slowly it ticks up as supply leaves. Once this price ticks up high enough to where the Pokemon Center's MSRP price is below the actual market value of the box, we'll see it leave Pokemon Center. And then with the Sword and Shield sets, we've seen this spike right after this. I've illustrated our two timelines for where we're investing in the box. So here is our low risk investment, pretty much bottomed out, give or take $5 or $10. If you're off $5 or $10 from the bottom of the box, it's not that big of a deal. But that is our low risk option. There has been, I think, maybe 1 or 2 sets that ever went below $80. Don't quote me on that. There's obviously been like sales or some random eBay listing for super cheap. But I'm talking about general market price below $80. That pretty much doesn't happen. So if you're buying a box $80, $85, like Paradox Rift at like $85 right now, that is bottomed out essentially. And the reason that's low risk is we've never seen a box stay below $100 for, 5 years. I don't think that has ever happened. Then the higher risk, this isn't high risk, obviously. Buying it somewhere over here would be high risk, but a higher risk investment, when it's at MSRP, you get this nice little boom here. So your timeline for profit is much quicker. You get this way faster growth. However, it's a little bit less safe because you're buying in at a higher entry point. And in my opinion, a mix of both of these is probably the best. That's what I'm doing. I'm buying boxes of Paradox Rift right now, super cheap. Then I also bought boxes of Lost Origin, Brilliant Stars, and I'm currently buying Silver Tempest when it's pretty much near MSRP price because I'm waiting for that boom. So take each side with a grain of salt and do what's best for you. Next, we'll talk about how active do you want to be in your investment. So we'll start with the inactive one. If you want to be inactive or as least active as possible in these investments, you can buy these boxes 1 year after release, buy a case, stick it in your closet, let it sit for 5 years, and sell that sealed case on eBay and make a profit. Pretty easy. And honestly, that's not a bad way to invest. Just putting it away, not thinking about it, being super inactive, completely forgetting about this box, and making a profit in the end. Not a bad way to invest. Now, the second way, more active. This one can be done super well to make lots of profit in a short period of time, but it's much trickier and you have to be way more in tune with what's going on in the hobby as a whole in order to make good money. To illustrate my point for an active investment, we'll use the example of the Lugia V Alt Art card. So I saw hype building for this card, and that's why I made the purchase, because I thought the hype would build, and continue to build with the hype around Sword and Shield, alt arts in general, and that I would be able to buy in and then sell at a later date and make a profit. So this card bottomed out 110, 120-ish. You could have bought it for, 120 about a month ago. However, I hadn't seen this at this point. So I let it build all the way up, and the hype and all that stuff build up to around, it was at 170 market price when I bought it. And then it was 184 taxes shipped to my door. So I saw hype building around this card, and I thought it didn't quite reach its full potential at 170. So I bought in, and right now it's sitting at 220. That's a 23% gain in less than 1 month. That's pretty damn good if you're talking about investing. Now, do I think this growth is going to go exponentially forever? No, I don't think that. I think it'll kind of look like this. Go up for a little bit, and then kind of stagnate, and then correct down. The graph will look like this. I think this price will be, 300, maybe 350, maybe 400. But that's the kind of growth that I'm expecting with this card. The price that I'm going to sell it at is anywhere from $300 to $350. As soon as I see it start to plateau, I'm selling the card. And this is an active investment. I had to be tuned in. I had to be looking at TCG Player, eBay listings to see how the market's moving and what is the floor on this product. If you want to be more lazy, not in a bad way, about your investments, you don't have to do this. But this is an option and you can make good money in this. And like the first point, I'm doing a little of both. Where are you at? My next point is about location. PokeOz illustrates this point pretty well. He's from Australia, and the market there is slightly different than the US. They don't have a Pokemon Center. And in one of his videos a few months ago, he was talking about how Fusion Strike was getting scarce in Australia, but it wasn't in the US. So he's picking up some boxes because he saw there was a shortage of Fusion Strike, and he thought the market was going to correct and increase in the future. And 1 month later, it gets scarce in the US, goes off the Pokemon Center, and now across the board, Fusion Strike has spiked. However, if you live in the UK, you can still get this at MSRP, $143 for a Fusion Strike booster box. So the timing between the different countries is all slightly different because there's different stock in each country. So when you take into account timing your investments and you're watching YouTubers or someone like that isn't from your country, you also have to think about where you are and how the market's looking in your specific country. I've grouped points 4 and 5 into one because they kind of go hand in hand. So how much money you have or how much money you're willing to invest in your situation. So what do I mean by your situation? I mean your financial situation and external factors, whether you're moving or the actual space you have for storage. All of this needs to be taken into account. So if you're on a low budget, but you're trying to buy booster boxes, buying it when they're at their low, $80 to $100 is probably your best bet. That way you're not overextending yourself and buying extremely expensive boxes. And for your situation, we'll illustrate an example. Say, a month ago, 2 months ago, you really wanted to buy Lost Origin. You saw that it was going to go off Pokemon Center and you saw gains, you saw money in your eyes. But throughout the next 2 weeks, you were in the process of moving from one apartment or one house to the next. Buying Lost Origin in this situation might just be too much of a hassle and it's not worth it. There will always be new investments to come and go. You don't have to buy today, you don't have to buy tomorrow, you don't have to buy this month. Your overall financial and physical situation trumps your Pokemon investments. These should be on the back burner of your investments or financial ideas. So you have to take all of this into account when you're timing your investments. All right, we've made it to the halfway point. We're going to transition from buying into selling. And I'd like to thank you for sticking with me and my horrible handwriting. And if you like videos like this, deep dives into Pokemon investing or things like that, I'm planning to release this type of video every 1 or 2 weeks. So I'd really appreciate if you guys subscribed. I won't ask again in this video. I'll stop self-promoting. And now we'll get on to selling. All right, we've made it to the selling portion. The 3 components that I found valuable in timing your sell are the general booster box trend that we've seen over Sun and Moon, Sword and Shield, etc., boom, and your general life timeline. So we'll hop into the first one first. All right, the graph I have here is booster box price over time, and this is the general trend. Obviously it's a rough graph, but it's a good generalization for how we've seen booster boxes move in Sun and Moon and what we're seeing in Sword and Shield as well. So I'll put a bunch of charts from Price Chart and TCG Player of Sun and Moon boxes. That way I can show you that I'm not actually just making this up and that there is actual data behind this. And I'll also show you some of the Sword and Shield ones as well. But what you kind of see in general, not every box follows this, obviously. There's exceptions. But you get that kind of drop off first year. Obviously, we already talked about this. Bottoms out, starts to trend upward pretty slowly, breaks the MSRP barrier. We'll call that here. And then we see this pretty strong upward trend. We're really seeing this in Sword and Shield. It's honestly much more of a spike in Sword and Shield alt art sets when you compare it to Sun and Moon or the earlier Sword and Shield sets. But it has that pretty aggressive trend upward, and then it kind of flattens out. A lot of these boxes kind of flattened out around $300. Some of the better ones flattened out around $500. But then another funny thing happened in the Sun and Moon sets. They had a second boom. This happened in 2022, 2023, and you can see it on pretty much every single graph where they had this massive spike. Now, can I guarantee that this will happen? No, obviously not. But this is the general trend we've seen. And we can look at this critically and think of what is a way that we can use this to make money. Now, one method that I'm thinking about using is cycling my money in and out of sets right before they leave the Pokemon Center, so right around MSRP price. And then I sell them once they've essentially doubled, maybe 2-3 years later after they've left the Pokemon Center, right around here. So after it's flatlined, but it hasn't flatlined for long. And then just take this money, invest it in new sets that are right around MSRP, and repeat that cycle over and over again, making more money, investing more money into it. I think this is a viable option, and I'm going to see how well it works. Now, another option would be you buy it here, we'll say MSRP again, and then you just hold on for 5, 10, 15 years in the future, and you reap the benefits of holding a box for a really long time as supply dwindles. This is a much more inactive way to invest where you just put your money in, you let it sit, and you ignore it. Both options are viable, and I'm going to do a little bit of both, but I think I can make a little bit more money if I buy it on this time, sell it right after it's kind of started to level off, and I reap the benefits of that spike right after it leaves Pokemon Center. But this isn't a recommendation or anything like that. Do what you feel is comfortable or what you want to do. Now, something that this goes hand in hand with is the boom. We see this time and time again in Pokemon sets. They sit, and then all of a sudden, the graph on Price Charting TCG Player looks like this. Now we're talking about the boom. So for this example, I'm going to talk about COVID, which was the biggest boom Pokemon has seen in recent years. So we'll look at vintage product price and time. So if you can time selling products in the height of a boom, that is when you're going to make the most money. But how do we do that? There's no real scientific way that you can buy at the low and guarantee sell at the highest high. It won't happen 100% of the time. It probably won't even happen like 10% of the time, but we can try our best. So the general trend we saw with vintage product in the COVID boom was that it was pretty stagnant. It was growing a little bit over time, but it was at this pretty stable price. And then all of a sudden the COVID boom came. Huge influx of people open these vintage and nostalgic boxes to get the hits. And then we saw this massive spike in price in the sealed and singles from Pokemon that time. This is the spike. Then it kind of died out and we see the graph and the prices of all these things kind of settle back down. But the ending price is still above the original price. Now, if I had a bunch of vintage product around this time, I would have sold it when all the streamers were doing their box breaks. Ludwig, Moist Critical, Mizkif, all of them, that's when I would have sold probably like 3/4 of the product and kept the other quarter in my sealed collection or just to hold for a later investment to maybe boom again. Now, obviously, hindsight is 20/20, so take that with a grain of salt. But with a recent boom, the alt art boom, we will likely see this exact same trend. If you look at the Latios and Latias GX, the graph looks pretty much like this when you go from right before it exploded in price to after. It's kind of settled back down. And this is pretty much how booms affect these products. The final point I have is your life timeline. Now, this isn't something I can give you advice on or tell you, oh, this is the best time to buy for you. This is something that you have to figure out on your own. And what do I mean by this? Say you have a decent investment collection and then your wife divorces you. She doesn't want the Pokemon because that's your nerdy stuff. She doesn't want to deal with that. But she divorces you, you lose half of your stuff, and then you're broke and you're struggling to pay your rent. It doesn't matter how optimal the growth of the booster box is at that point. You need money to pay rent. That trumps any growth chart I could draw or price charting or TCG player could make. Another example would be you have a 10-year-old kid and you buy a bunch of sealed product to hold for the next 10 years. You intend to sell this product when he goes to college. It doesn't really matter if the product is 1,000 or 1,300 at that point. You're selling it because you're using that to pay for his tuition. What I'm saying is, if you can hold the products, hold the products. If you need to sell them to gain capital or liquid assets, do that. Don't overextend yourself in your Pokemon assets and forget about your real life assets. Thank you for watching. I hope you appreciate my horrible handwriting and terrible graphs. And if you're a degenerate cardboard investor like me, subscribe or Rudy's gonna come out from under your bed, steal your wife, steal your cards, steal your booster boxes, all that garbage. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay safe out there.